So I think our next step is to have a report back from your facilitator, come rapporteur, for a couple of minutes or so. And in the order I've got here, it's Jamie from the UK. Are we able to bring you in?
We had friends there from all over Britain and Ireland. We had a challenge there, as Jamie alluded to, but we did manage to get some discussions about challenges on comparing averages. That's sometimes seen as a bit of a challenge because it doesn't necessarily take into account all of the different factors that contribute to that. So one of the examples was age at first calving. You know, a 24-month age at first calving could include animals that are calving at 19 months right the way through to 30 months, or it could be, you know, within maybe 30 days of 24 months. So when we're considering systems, we also acknowledge that we had to be really careful when seeming to appear like a more intensified dairy production was automatically better, because I think that one thing that Jude had said in her session was about the importance just to crank things up just steadily, just within whatever you can do on your farming system. And I know there were studies at University of Nottingham and Kingshay, I think, had done some work on specific systems and what the most profitable farmers were doing within those systems. We were then joined by Marion, who was one of the participants in our group, which was great to get a new voice on there. Got the Irish perspective there about where farmers were taking their advice from, were trying to develop their own knowledge, and the importance of farmer discussion groups was massive, certainly in dairy. Liz King had then spoken about in the beef and sheep side in Britain. The vet is a trusted advisor, and we'd had some discussion about collaborative meetings between all of the farm advisors in one place, and the power of having that. Teagasc, of course, was quoted as being and the Farmers Journal as quoted as being a major component of that. We were then talking, of course, about innovation and access to some of that information, and I think that potentially younger farmers coming into the industry perhaps find it easier to access a lot of that than some of the folks who and obviously that's a generalization, but that's the case. And then we started to scratch the surface of talking about succession, so both in terms of family succession and succession of the farm business in terms of labor, and there were challenges put forward, and potentially we all just need to think about how we sell our industry, and the challenge, what have we got to compete with industries like construction, for example. And it's not all about money. So we've sort of covered quite a lot in what was cut a little bit short. So there you go, Ray.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So just few words from the French group. So we found that with the poll we found the three items of the three pillars of sustainability, because milk price, climate change, and labor came in the first place. In fact, concerning the most important challenge to sustain. And we discussed about other challenges for dairy sectors in France and in Brittany mainly, and in west of France. So the density of processing units, the price of cereals could also be a challenge for dairy sectors. Price, because of the price for farmers concerning the feeds, but also the competitions, the risk of competitions with the milk production. And we also mentioned the soil fertility in relations to the stock and storage and release of carbon in soils. What concerning the challenges for dairy sector and for farmers, and mainly for dairy sector, is the attractiveness of the farming profession, and to become a farmer. We need to succeed in making or produce a positive message concerning what is dairy farmers and what is a job. And we have to be we need innovations, and we need to be innovative in this aspect. And we think that yes, it's probably one of the main target for the next months, next years, to better attract new farmers, new students to this job. And just last thing concerning what it was said before by Jude, I think that, and we think that if our football players have took the example of the British rugby players, maybe we will have much. So they don't drink so much milk, maybe more beer or wine. So thank you for this part.
Thank you, Sylvain. There are other nations, besides England. Okay, so where are we going next, Harpo? Perhaps to Spain? Is that Pilar?
Yeah, well, I think we've got Pilar on the line, so I'm just going to add Pilar.
Yes. Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yep, hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, okay. Hello, everybody. Well, sorry also from our part, because we have some technical problems and we couldn't have a group interaction, but we managed to get the answers to the query. So I will report that results from the query, and also a contribution from a farmer that was directly with me during this session. So at least we have some to add to the query. Okay, then as the main concern is related to sustainability has been the milk price and succession. Those two aspects have been identified as the first and second concerns about this issue. As the third challenge has been also related to milk price, is the cost of inputs, and related to staff also is the lack of qualified staff. Then, as addition to these points, as I tell you, from a direct contribution from a farmer, we have a quality of life or time for the farmers' time to dedicate, to innovate, and to acquire all these capacities that were mentioned by the presentation of Liz. And also, another point has been the valorization of slurry and manure, no? To try to, in areas with scarce land availability, to make profit of this manure, integrating in the agriculture sector around the farmers. So these two aspects have been added to the query. And that's all from Spain.
Thank you, Pilar. So I think that just leaves Portugal. Who can we bring in from Portugal or from the Azores? I think reasonable consistency emerging between the three groups as to what the concerns are. A lot of it around socioeconomics. some of the things we've picked out earlier in the symposium as well.
What was interesting was there was a conversation in our group about how attractive agriculture is from a financial point of view to new labour markets when we're competing with construction, where they might get paid £20 to £50 an hour. Of course, so it's only £20 an hour on a 7 o'clock till 4 o'clock shift. Whereas I've just moved to the Peak District, funny enough, in England, and it's quite interesting when you talk to young people in this area. They've never even thought about how beautiful the area is because they've always lived here. And I think perhaps in farming we're guilty of underselling how brilliant the job can be because we're just used to it. We're used to the views and the fact that we've got space and the countryside. And I wonder if we can do a better job globally at selling the positive benefits that are not financial.
There's no doubt when things are going well, it's a great job. When things are not going so well, it can be quite isolated. Enrique, I can see you. Are you ready to report from Portugal, from the north of Portugal?
Yes. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you, Enrique.
Okay. I still have another voice in the micro in the phones. Okay.
Okay, Enrique, if you make sure any other breakout session tab is closed on your computer screen. So close the breakout session tab, then that should clear any other voices that you might hear.
Yes, Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. Sorry for these troubles with the connection. So about the north and I suppose the Açores region of Portugal, we reach more or less the same results of the other groups. So the economic factors were the most important. Are you listening to me well? Okay. The price of the production factors or the cost of the production factors were the first choice, and the milk price the second, and the access to land the third one. This is, I suppose, special for the specifically to the North Portugal region, where land is very difficult to buy or to rent. One point that was discussed between the group was we selected the economic factors, but they are linked to the other aspects of the sustainability, and mainly with the society, because, for instance, the price of the milk, it's very it's have a huge connection of the perception of the society, that the society have about the milk, and the price that they need to pay to the milk, because we have here a problem of the low prices that are controlled by the market mechanisms. And also linked to this, it's the need for the communication, or to have a better communication with the society, or the social aspects, and the efficiency of the production. So we selected the economic factors, but they have been linked by the participants to the agronomic and the animal production area, so the technical part, and or environmental, if we want, if we prefer, and also the society aspects. And it's more or less very briefly what we discussed.
Okay, thank you, Enrique. David has messaged to say that he can do a report if it's very quick. David, then we'd be pleased to hear from the Azores Harpal, if you can bring him in. Otherwise, we're in danger of eating into lunch and giving you indigestion.
Interestingly, when in Britain, one of the challenges we were finding was the market response with milk price wasn't going up as fast initially as the costs. So whilst it may not have a massive effect on the bottom line in terms of profit, obviously profits would be lower. It had a massive effect on cash flow. So there was a lot of squeezing of farms at that time, at the early stage of the Ukraine-Russia conflict war.
Thanks, Steve. David, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, calling the Azores, David. If you could give a quick summary of your thoughts from the group in the Azores, please.
Yeah. So quickly, as I summarized in the chat, we have two common points with North Portugal.
David, we can see the points you made in the chat. You're picking up milk price, production cost, and climate. We can't hear anything from you. There's no voice at your end, whether that's deliberate or not. But I think we've got the three main points there. So given the challenges we've had, with your permission, I think we should break for lunch, because we are eating into your quality time. And if we can return, please, at 1:35, that would be great, because that will allow us to get back on schedule. And so apologies for the technical difficulties, and also that we've curtailed your lunch, and I hope that's not going to be too compromising for you. So please join us again at 1:35. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you managed to have a reasonable truncated lunch, and you managed to grab something. We can't see you, so perhaps you're still finishing it. So we now have 3 20-minute presentations from members of the project team, followed by a 15-minute question and answer session, when we'll bring all 3 back to the stage. And the first presentation is from César Resch, who's a researcher in dairy systems at AGACAL in Galicia. And César has over 12 years of research experience in the field of dairy systems and economics, having completed his PhD in the economics of dairy nutrition. And then prior to AGACAL, César worked for 15 years for a commercial dairy company, and he's also traveled extensively to New Zealand, France, and the exotic place which is Cavan in the Republic of Ireland. So he's got a diverse range of experiences. So I'll hand you over to César.
Okay. Is everything right? Okay. Well, really, I was impacted about my experience in 1 year in Ireland, in County Cavan. But anyway, I'm going to tell you just to summarize in 20 minutes what we've been doing these 2 years, these 4 years of project that they are ending now. Well, as Rai said in the beginning, we are 11 regions, and this is a collaborative project in which 100 pilot farms, which I want to thank deeply their collaboration. Well, we were collecting data on these 100 pilot farms for 2 years, and the data collected were mainly economics and environmental. Well, my colleagues Laura and Marion, they go further on these items, and what I'm going to say in this little chart is I'm going to tell you it is. What we try to find in what we found it in these farms in terms of a relationship and symbiotic items in terms of which is the relationship between economics and environmental. And after this, try to build up a roadmap for dairy farms. Next, please. Okay, just no, the previous one, only one. Next is only one. Previous one, please. Next one. Sorry, was my fault. Okay, that's one. Okay, well, I tell you how we did in this part. Just well, we did analyze almost 100 farms in terms of several different variables related with production, with fertilizing, with how they feed animals, how they manage the herd, and as well in environmental aspects like a carbon footprint or equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions. So at this stage, what we did was just to sort these farms in terms of how was their stocking rate, just sorting them from the highest to the lowest in 4 different groups, every group with the same number of farms. And later on, what we found is that if we look for a variable which is a replacement heifer percentage, well, we found that those with a higher stocking rate, they have the highest number of replacement heifers. It was glad for me to hear Jude conference, because we are going to agree in many things, and well, you are going to see how our figures, Dairy for Future, they are very, very close to those that Jude tell us in terms of efficiency, in terms of money, in terms of lower carbon footprint. Next slide, please. Okay, which is the relationship between stocking rate and carbon footprint emission? Okay, well, this is clear as well, that if we sort our farms looking at the variable, the carbon footprint per kilo of FPCM, which is fat and protein corrected milk, from the highest to the lowest, and we make 4 different groups, we can see that, and we appreciate that really there's a big difference between those who have the highest carbon footprint per liter of milk and those who have the lowest. And in terms of stocking rate, which is stocking rate LU, live units per hectare, those who has the highest, they have the higher carbon footprint, and those who has the lower stocking rate, they have the lowest carbon footprint. So it seems to be a relationship between the stocking rate and emissions, and this is probably related with the availability we have in the farm of making our own food, of spreading our slurry and producing our crops. So this is the first one I want to tell you, which is the relationship between carbon footprint and surface in farm. Next slide, please. Okay, this is another one. I guess we should go further on this item, which is accurate to try to be accurate in how we feed cows. Purchase feed and carbon footprint. Well, purchase feed per kilogram of milk solids, which is how many kgs of solids we produce per cow, depending on the amount of feed we are buying for cows. Well, again, we are going to sort these farms depending on if they are purchasing high amount of food or feed, sorry, or low amount of feed. Those who are purchasing low amount of feed, there are those who has a lower carbon footprint, and those who with a medium hike purchase expenses of euros in getting feed for animals. They are having a higher carbon footprint. So this is not a matter of how many kgs of concentrate I am feeding to my cow, or how many kgs of forage or whatever. If it is a matter of how many kgs of concentrate I'm giving to my cow and how many liters of milk. So we are talking again about how efficient we are in terms of feeding our cows in our farm. So as you can read there, well, the technological challenge is to produce 40 kg of milk with a low amount of concentrate, and this is what is the way to do this is try to produce a high quality and abundance forage in our farm. Next, please. Okay. And this is the last variable. I don't know why you can. Well, the figures are not right, but I tell you, all these figures here are not 001, 001. Okay. Well, again, we gathered the farms, the pilot farms, in 4 different groups. Those with the lowest on the left, with the lowest total variable cost. This total variable cost, they are very related with the way we are handling our farm. Okay, I didn't include the milk price because this is going to hide a lot of things because they are quite different in the different regions participating in the program. But what I did was to consider how many euros per 100 liters they were spending in the farms, and those with the 20 lowest, they had an average of 20.9, as you can see in the chart, and the medium low 27, medium high 40, and the highest one they had 37 euros per 100 liters. So you cannot see, but trust on me, the figures are increasing and they go since 1.2 to 1.4. So it is going higher from one to the other. Okay. Next one, please. Well, what I'm going to show you now is how, as Judith said, there are many things in which we can fix in the farm. There is not only a key point in the farm. There are several key points, and what I'm going to show you are 2 farms. Next, please. These are the Topiff. They are the farms participating from Galicia in this project. And the next one, and well, I'm going to show you 6 different variables. Next, please. 6 different variables in which. Next slide, please. Okay. 6 different variables in which these farms were participating. I'm going to do a case study of 2 farms, the green one and the red one. Okay, I'm going to show you some figures of these farms. Okay, I always you see a red figure, and underneath this figure you see 17 out of 18. It means this is number 17th in this variable, which is milk produced per cow, which is a high production farm, compared to the green one, which is almost, we can say, one of the lowest. This is 57 out of 18 production per cow. Okay, this is one figure, and we are going to see how they are performing in another figures. Next one, please. This is the second one. This is milk solids per hectare. We can see that the green one is quite weak, only 625 kg of milk solids per hectare, and the red one is not doing too bad because, well, milk quality wasn't very good, but well, they were producing a lot of milk, and they have a quite high stocking rate. So you can see the green arrow and the red arrow, they let us to know where the farms are in relation with the other 80. Okay, next one, please. This is the third variable we analyzed. In this one, the green one has a very good figure, which is the replacement heifers, and Jude talked as well about this. So heifers are producing nothing, but they are producing methane every day, and so we should fit our necessities to those heifers we need. So we don't have to do an extra replacement heifer effort if we don't need them. Okay, In this case, the green one is number 4 out of 80 in percentage of heifers, and the other one is more or less in the middle of the table, number 32 out of 80. Next one, please. Okay, this is a key point as well, which is the stocking rate, this live units per hectare. This is the number of animals, including heifers and dry cows, of course, we have per hectare. As you can see, as I told you before, well, the red one farm, it is number 36 with a stocking rate quite high. I mean, in terms of this sample of farms, we have 100 farms. At this study, I analyzed it. We analyzed it here in AGACAL, only 80. But well, this is number 36. Sorry, I don't see the screen. Okay, now, and the green one, it is number 15 with a lower stocking rate because, well, less cows, more selfie. It makes a lower stocking rate, and this is 1.55. And well, we can remember as well that he has only 600 kg of solids per hectare. Next slide, please. Well, we can say this figure, at least for me, I'm more economics, and summarize a little bit how things are going in the farm. And as I was trying to say in the last chart of the first part of my chart, variable cost summarize very well what is going on in the farm. If we have a reasonable variable cost, it means we're making a good use of our resources, and it means we are going to pollute less, and it means we are going to have lower carbon footprint. So you can see that the results are quite similar in these both farms, the red one and the green one, and well, they are not in top, they are not in the bottom, and they are in a good shape. We can say 25 and 17 out of 80. Next one, please. This is the next one is the last variable we are going to analyze, which is, I guess, nitrogen. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, this happens, and well, I excluded of this analysis the biofarms, and well, as you can see, the green one is the championship in terms of not utilization. This is not a biofarm. This is a conventional farm. He's using phosphate in their paddocks, and but he's not using any nitrogen. And the other one is making a quite good use of nitrogen with only 100 fertilizing units of nitrogen per hectare. So this, the second one, is in the middle. You can see in the bar chart that the 36 farms are between 0 and 90 kg of nitrogen per hectare, which is half of our farms that were using a very low amount of nitrogen per hectare, and well, only a very few are over 180, and most of them they are with crops. Okay, next one, please. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay. I think there was a previous one. Okay, this is the one I wanted to comment. Well, this is carbon footprint in terms of equivalent of carbon per liter of milk, of fat and protein corrected milk. Well, this means not very much for me in terms of 1K or 1.27. I mean, what I'm looking for is where they were in the list. Red one is number 4, and the green one is number 27. What I mean is that these farms, they were very different. I am going to introduce them to you, and so I want you to watch in these two videos. The first one is the green one. His name is Daniel. He's from the Pastoriza in Galicia, and this is the presentation. Please, video number 1.
Empezamos co pastoreo aproximadamente cando foi o final das cotas, que no 2005, cando se empezou que había que comprar sí ou sí, e se non a tiñas, pois había que adaptarse. Estábamos producindo por encima da cuota e entonces, como xa non se podía comprar, pois decidimos reducir a produción e producir a un costo bastante menor. O tema dos cruces empezou xusto nese momento cando empezamos a producir en base a pastoreo. Dámonos conta de que ter un coche para andar a muchísima velocidade nun camiño moi malo, pois non tiña sentido. E entonces empezamos buscando un pouco de máis rusticidade, animales que se nos aguantaran mellor incluso para desplazamento e que tiveran unha capacidade de inxesta de forraxe maior que tiña a hosting que tiñamos naquele momento. En datos económicos mellorounos, a nosa rentabilidade mellorou bastante. Non sei como sería se seguíramos no outro mundo, porque para iso hai que estar nel, non? Pero sí, a verdade é que nos foi ben.
The second one is the red one, and he's a farmer. His name is Alberto. He's from Irisho in the north part of Galicia, and we're going to watch this 1-minute video.
O tipo de alimentación é en base a erva verde. Compramos algún silo de millo, saio a secar ás 9 da mañán, sego a erva, descargo aquí na nave ao carro. El, cando chega, colle mitad dela para un lote de produción, e falles o carro, e despois colle outra mitade. A erva verde aportalle moita digestibilidade á ración, ten un valor nutricional moi alto, e dalle pois esa humidade á ración que fai que sexa, bueno, dalle moita estabilidade ruminal, non poden escoller nas racións. A ración compónse de 50 kg de erva verde, 26 de silo de erva, 5,5 de fariña de millo, 3 de núcleo e 3,5 de colza. Realmente o certificar que estamos facendo, se estamos facendo ben ou non, e ver pois a eficiencia e a resiliencia que ten isto que estamos facendo. Trasladounos, bueno, pois algún coñecemento do que era da ración, bueno, algúns datos recollimos que nos foi de utilidade, como por exemplo das analíticas de erva verde e todo eso.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, this is next slide, please. So just next one, please. Thank you. Next one. Okay, give another one, just to read all the conclusions. Okay, well, this is just summarizing what I was telling to you. Just the GHG emissions are a good indicator of efficiency and of how our resources are used. Precision in the use of resources seems to be key to have a GHG under control. And well, I gave you three examples of how to manage, on what to look at in your farm if you want to have under control these GHG emissions. And the GHG emissions I'll finish saying that it's a good benchmark in terms of economics of dairy farm. Next one. And remember, next one, farmer must lead the system and the system mustn't lead the farmer. And well, this is for my part, and thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you, César. We'll bring you back on stage at the end of this sequence. So before we move to the next presentation, can I just remind the audience to please continue to post your questions and indeed your comments on the chat, so that we can bring those back to the presenters after the end of this session. So our next presentation, it's a double act. It's from Laura Shewbridge-Carter, hello Laura, from the Scottish Rural College. And Laura is based in Dumfries, southwest Scotland, the milk field described by Marion this morning. Laura's background is in animal behavior and welfare, and she focused on cow housing during her PhD. And she will be, I think, accompanied by Mark Topliff, a colleague of mine. Hello, Mark. Economics specialist at AHDB. So over to you, Laura.
Brilliant. Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, as you mentioned, we'll be sharing this presentation. So I'll give the first half and then I'll pass over to Mark halfway through. And today we're going to talk to you about some of the key perspectives of the financial performance of dairy farms in the Atlantic area. Whoop. Love a good technical issue. Here we go. So part of the project was to perform an economic evaluation of the 100 pilot dairy farms that partook in the project. So this involved collecting the financial data and also farm characteristic data of the 100 farms. As you've already heard, it was across 5 countries, so you can see the breakdown there on the slide of the number of farms in each region, and also the average number of cows for each region on the farms. And this was across 2 years. And from this, we were able to produce case studies for farmers for each individual farm. And these included key performance indicators, or KPIs. So these are measures that are collected from each area of the farm, which are representative of the general performance. So one example of this is calving intervals, which can also link into the financial performance of the farm. So just a quick mention on these farmer case studies. This is kind of an example of one. It is blurred out. It is a real case study, so it's just blurred out to protect the data of the farm. But these were all handed out to all of the farms involved. It was 5 pages of economic performance data, which highlighted kind of the profitability, financial efficiency, and then the technical performance. So these KPIs that I mentioned. So moving on to some of the data we can show you. So all of the economic data we show you today is going to be in euro per cow. So along the bottom here, we have total costs, and along the side, we have total revenue. I think you can see my mouse there, yeah. So you'll also notice that our 5 regions have become 6. So we took the choice to separate Portugal into mainland Portugal and also the Azores, just because they're very different farming methods, which has resulted in very different kind of economic profiles. So it just made sense to separate those out into the two different regions here for in terms of just the economic performance. And so from these graphs, year 1 and year 2, you can see a very clear pattern where farms that had very high costs, so those farms on the right-hand side of these graphs, also had very high total revenues. But in this next graph, you'll see that along the bottom, we still have total costs. So those high cost farms are still along the right. but this time up along the side, we have net margins. So those farms that had the high costs, which were associated with high revenues, didn't necessarily lead to highest net margins. So more so those farms on the left-hand side of these graphs, which had low costs coupled with low revenues, but turning out higher net margins generally. With this data, we were also able to split it into different systems. So we kind of focused on 3 main systems. So that is a grazing system. So this was categorized as farms that grazed for longer than 60% of the year. So they're in green. We had mixed systems. So that's grazing for less than 60% of the year and housed for the rest of the year. And then we have fully housed systems in the blue. So in terms of net margin, we don't see one system kind of outperforming another, but as expected, when you look along costs, most of the farms there on the right hand side of the graph are in that blue housed system. So those housed systems tend to have higher costs, as we would suspect, and the grazing systems in green more so on the left hand side of this graph. So in terms of sort of regional differences in terms of costs, we were able to look at this in terms of variable costs and fixed cost ratios. So the graphs there on the left are the variable cost ratios. Nothing really jumping out at us, all fairly even for the different regions. A little increase there in year 2 for Portugal, but nothing as, I guess, interesting as what we see in the fixed cost ratio graphs there on the right. So in terms of that, you can see the Azores have very low percentage of fixed costs, even compared to Portugal. So that's where we really made that distinction of separating those into 2 different categories. And then you can see the highest fixed cost ratios there are for France in the blue in the middle, just popping up. And so what we can see here when we split, just looking at those fixed costs and splitting them up into different categories, so depreciation, opportunity, and then interest costs, we can kind of see where all of these costs are coming from. And these fixed costs are primarily driven by the climatic factors which are influencing farming methods, particularly in terms of the farms in the Azores. So like we said, they have very low fixed costs and they have a very specialized climate, which really drives their farming method and requires very little investment in farm infrastructure. Whereas for France, we see that their farming method accumulates high equipment and building costs, which lead to these high depreciation costs. So that's there in the blue for France, but actually, which is the tipping point really for France is that green. So those opportunity costs, which when we looked into it, France has a very high unpaid labor cost of just over €20 an hour for unpaid labor. And so this is where I'll hand off to Mark just to carry on with this labour discussion and a few more of those technical KPIs that we mentioned in the beginning.
Thanks, Laura. So as we've seen in that previous slide, the opportunity costs are quite a big proportion for some of these countries. And this slide is looking at one of those opportunity costs, which is the value of unpaid labour. So we've got the units of unpaid labour in a full-time equivalent along the bottom, and the unpaid hourly rate, the value of that hourly rate along the side. And we've averaged that by country, and we can see here quite a range in that hourly rate, that value that's given to unpaid labour. So as Laura's just mentioned, France has the highest value of unpaid labour attributed to it, and the Azores and Portugal have the lowest. So this difference does affect those fixed cost ratios. Next slide, please. What about paid worker hourly rate then? Well, these 2 charts are showing each farm, each of the pilot farms, and the hourly paid rate for those farms for both year 1 and 2. And we've color coded these, and you can see we've seen that in that top 20 farms that have got the highest paid hourly rate, that is, majority of those farms is the French farms, followed by the UK farms. But when you look at that bottom sort of set of farms. There are a range of the regions within that bottom set. Next slide, please. One of the aspects of the project was to do an online farmer survey. And one of the questions which was asked about the survey was the availability of labour and how that may be favourable for the farming of dairy in those particular regions. And this online survey showed us that it was took place in 2020. And this chart on the left is just showing whether more of the difference in terms of those that said it was favourable to unfavourable was either unfavourable or whether it was more favourable. And really it was the apart from sort of French, which was an exception, and we'll come back to the UK in a second, the other regions saw that the availability of labour was unfavourable for dairy farming in their regions. For the UK, this was done probably before the real impact of leaving the UK took effect, really. And so I think if we took that survey now in the UK, that response would probably be more unfavourable for the UK. But for France, with the most favourable response, it could possibly be linked to the fact that there's higher hourly rates of pay, which would mean that there's more availability of labour. Next slide, please. Just looking this is the last sort of slide looking at labour, and look at it in terms of labour efficiency. So along the bottom of these charts, we've got the cows per person on a full-time equivalent basis. And then up the side, we've got the net margin on a euros per cow basis. Really just trying to show whether there was a relationship between having more cows per person versus the margin produced. And from both year one and year two across the region here, across the whole Atlantic area, there was no real sort of strong result, but it shows that maybe increasing the number of cows per person doesn't necessarily result in increased net margin, and there are more factors that are involved in that efficiency rather than just the number of cows per person. Next slide, please. Just move on to one of the technical measures now. This is a replacement rate, the replacement heifer rate. And again, this is looking at the replacement rate in both the year one and year two, the data versus the net margin on a euro per cow basis. And there was some regional difference here with the UK farms. They all had a replacement rate of under 40%. Now, when there was some further analysis done by one of our colleagues, it was found that actually that only in the UK did the replacement rate have any effect on the financial efficiency, and in the other regions of the Atlantic area, it didn't seem to have any effect at all. It's not entirely clear what maybe the reasons for that is, so if anybody has any comments or thoughts on that, then please do post them in the comments box. Next slide, please. Next technical measure looked at is the age at first calving, or AFC. And here we've done a breakdown by the type of farming method, so whether they're mostly grazing system, a mixed system, or a house system. And again, from year one to year two, and comparing against the net margin euro per cow. And what we see here is that generally, there's a spread of those systems amongst the age of calving, but generally the housing systems seem to have more age at first calvings under 26 months than other systems. And if you look above the sort of 26-month age group, the net margins tended to sort of decrease. So there's some relationship there between the age at first calving and the net margin. Next slide, please. So just to summarise then what Laura and I have just covered. So it shows that through the period that we looked at the data, the dairy farms in the Atlantic area showed some signs of economic resilience because there were some difficult years in that time, especially the summer drought in Europe in 2018. There were some very large regional differences in fixed costs down to the sort of climatic and farming system effects. And then the cost of labour was certainly a key factor in driving up costs in countries like France, and it was France always stood out as being favourable in terms of labour availability as well. We also saw that a higher rate of cows per person didn't really impact on the net margin. So does that create a false economy and decrease labour efficiency? That's one to comment. The replacement rate didn't really affect financial efficiency other than in the UK. So that was interesting to see. And generally, when you looked at the age at first calving, when you increase that age above 26 months, the net margins decreased. Okay, and that's all we have for this session, and look forward to your questions later.
Thanks both. I'm sure a lot to probe in the question and answer session. So please, audience, keep your questions coming in. We're getting a nice stream now. So our third presenter in this sequence is Marion Sorley. She's a researcher with Teagasc, which is the Agriculture and Food Development Authority in the Republic of Ireland, better known as Teagasc. Her PhD is focused on identifying sustainable practices on dairy farms and using LCA methodology, to model the impacts. Marion has also spent time working abroad in the dairy industry in Canterbury, New Zealand, and also a period at the University of Nottingham. So we look forward to hearing what you've got to tell us, Marion.
Hi, Ray. Thanks for introducing me. So I guess I'll try and share my screen there. Awesome. Okay, so apologies for my voice. A bit sick at the moment. But yeah, so today, I work at Teagasc as a research technician as well, but today I'll be talking about the carbon and ammonia footprints of the pilot dairy farms. Oops. So first of all, I'll be going through the environmental targets of these countries in the Atlantic area and characteristics then of these three systems that we've identified, grazing, mixed, and housed. And I'll give a definition and KPIs of these three different systems. Also the methodology, a little bit of how I actually calculated the carbon footprint. And then we'll get into some of the results. So here we have a graph of the per capita greenhouse gas emissions from each of the countries in the Atlantic area. You can see straight away that Ireland kind of stands out from the rest, has the highest per capita emissions in this group, and also the largest proportion coming from agriculture, so roughly 34% in the year that this graph. So 34% compared to the other countries that are around roughly 11%. And we see this kind of reflected in the target reductions. So Ireland has one of the most ambitious targets of 22 to 30%, followed then by the UK as well as 17 to 30% reduction target. This is just for the agricultural sector. And then we have Spain and France then on 18%, Portugal on 11%. And these are with different baseline years. So Ireland, you'll see, has a baseline year of 2018. And actually what we see in 2018, we actually had a spike in emissions. So we have a huge target to, if that's our baseline year, there's a lot of reduction needed. And if we look then at the targeted measures, we see a common theme of reducing fertilizer and nitrogen, improving manure management. So that's things like actually reducing our fertilizer rate, using more protected urea, better use of manure, using low emission slurry spreading like trailing shoe, band spreader. And also there's other strategies there like improving genetic merit and agroforestry, using more legumes in our swards, more white clover, that sort of thing. So bearing that in mind, we'll move forward and look at these pilot farms, and we categorize them according to systems. So what I mean by that is we've defined a grazing system as the cows are out grazing more than 60% of the time, whereas a house system is they're indoors all year round, and then a mixed system is somewhere in between. And we have here the averages of grazing time for each of the systems. On average, grazing systems, they're grazing 68% of the time, the mixed systems 42%. And then some other characteristics then. So stocking rate, our grazing mixed systems quite steadily there on 2 livestock units per hectare, compared to our house systems of 4.2, quite a bit higher, almost double the stocking rate there. Unsurprisingly so, since this house system relies quite heavily on a lot of imported feed and exports a lot of manure. In relation to that, then they're using more productive cows, you could say, higher solids per cow. The house system there is over 9,700 kilos of fat and protein corrected milk per cow on average, compared to our grazing system at 5,800 kilos of milk per cow. And what we also see is, we've sort of touched on this before, but there's a trend there with the higher producing cows. They tend to have a higher age at first calving. Our house system and mixed system have average age of first calving of 27 months and high replacement rates as well. So our house system there is a replacement rate of 31%. So I've got stocking rate and grazing time there again, but concentrate, unsurprisingly, that the house system is the highest amount of concentrate being bought in on average, 3.2 ton of concentrate per livestock unit, compared to our grazing system then at under a ton of concentrate per livestock unit. And we see the same trend in the purchased forage. But we also see with the fertilizer use, the grazing systems are more reliant on that fertilizer nitrogen, quite high there, of an average of over 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, compared to our mixed and house systems at about 120, 130 kilos of N per hectare. So with this, I'd just like to give a bit of, overview of methodology behind this carbon footprint. And so I use this tool called Life Cycle Assessment, or LCA. And what it does is takes into account all the emissions associated with the production of milk. So it takes into account the emissions from all the inputs and the production of that, things like fertilizer and feed. So it includes the life cycle, the land use change, emissions from things like soya, all the emissions on farm. It's basically all the emissions associated with the production of milk. And once we've totaled all these emissions from the farm, we can express them with different metrics. And I've given 3 metrics there with 2 different boundaries. However, we'll only be looking at the global boundary. And we'll be looking at the per kilo of fat and protein corrected milk unit, but there are also other units we can use, such as per hectare of on-farm land, or the land on which the milk is being produced, or per hectare of global land use. So this is taking into account the land used for imported feed. So we're using this per kilo of milk metric. It's quite useful in terms of describing the efficiency of milk production, and also quite useful from a marketing perspective. Dairy producers, or companies marketing dairy products like to be able to say that this milk or yogurt or cheese is produced from milk coming from milk with a low carbon footprint. However, this metric doesn't account really for the impact to land. It also tends to favor intensive farming. So with that, we'll just look at this is a graph of all the pilot farms that I looked at, their carbon footprint in kilos of CO2 equivalents per kilo of fat and protein corrected milk. So each bar represents a farm, and the bars are color coded according to system. So we've got green is the grazing, blue is the mixed, and the brown is the house system. And yes, we tend to see the house system on the higher end of the scale, but there is quite a good mix. And it's interesting to note that the lowest carbon footprint farm is actually a house system. So the questions we might ask is how different are the three systems, and if is there much of a difference? What factors influence the carbon footprint? So we'll dive into that now. So when I did an ANOVA analysis of these three systems, we found that the house system is significantly higher than the grazing and mixed systems, with a mean carbon footprint of 1.51. The mixed and grazing then on 1.23 and 1.14 kilos of CO2 equivalents per kilo of milk. And what we noticed is that the house systems have quite a different emissions profile, you could say, to the grazing and mixed systems. So here we have the house systems emissions profile, and we have the emissions from enteric fermentation in blue, emissions from manure in yellow, green is fertilizer, red is concentrate. But we can see there from this graph that generally as your carbon footprint increases, your emissions from manure and concentrate also increases. And we've found that there's a strong relationship to feed efficiency. So that's basically the more milk per kilo of dry matter intake, the lower your carbon footprint, and also milk yield. So I think this has been touched on before, that improving your milk yield per cow will also reduce your carbon footprint. However, interestingly enough, we only saw this trend with the house systems. We didn't really see this with the grazing and mixed systems. So you see there the house systems are in the red with quite a strong negative trend, and then our grazing and mixed systems really no trend there with milk production per cow and carbon footprint. So if we look then at the grazing and mixed systems emissions profile, we see it's quite different to the house systems. There's no real trend that we can see there with those bars, but we do know that enteric fermentation, fertilizer, concentrate, manure emissions are quite important. We did see quite a strong trend with grazing time and carbon footprint. So if increasing our grazing time actually reduces our carbon footprint, and also feed efficiency as well. Yeah. So I just wanted to show some examples as well of just comparing some farms. So if we just look at the emissions from manure management, here I have two farms, one from the Basque Country and one from France, and they're quite similar. These two farms are quite similar in terms of milk yields and other parameters, but what's different is their manure storage. Their liquid storage the farm on the left is covered and the farm on the right is uncovered. And we see quite a big difference there. And this is mostly due to the methane given off from the uncovered storage. It makes a huge difference to their carbon footprint. If we look then at concentrate, I have two farms here, both in Spain. The farm on the left, again, they're both similar parameters, but the farm on the left is feeding more concentrate at 5.4 ton per livestock unit, but they're using locally produced byproducts, low crude protein rations, compared to the farm on the right then, which is actually feeding less concentrate at 3.8 ton per livestock unit, but it's mostly soya. So we see here even though the farm on the right is actually feeding less concentrate per livestock unit, their emissions from concentrate are much higher compared to the one on the left. And so it's just a clear example of the impact that feeding soya makes. And with that, I'd just like to move on to the ammonia emissions. So ammonia is not a greenhouse gas, it's an air pollutant. And the effect of ammonia is seen regionally compared to greenhouse gases, which do have a global effect. So it must be addressed on a regional basis. So that's why ammonia emissions, I've expressed it as kilos of ammonia per hectare. And it is agriculture is quite a major source. In Ireland, for example, 99% of national ammonia emissions are actually due to agriculture. And most of that is down to manure and fertilizer. So here we have box plots of the different systems, how they fare in terms of ammonia emissions. I will say that ammonia is strongly related to stocking rate. So that's basically why the house systems are so much higher. Ammonia has a huge is strongly related to stocking rate. So bearing that in mind, if we just look more closely at the grazing and mixed systems, the grazing systems there, we can see the spread much better when we have that scale. The grazing systems have a mean of 49 kilos of ammonia per hectare, compared to the mixed, just that little bit higher on 68 kilos of ammonia per hectare. And that's coming down to manure application. So how much and how is it being spread? The form, is it solid or liquid application? So, and are they using low emission slurry spreading? So that can make quite a big difference as well. The housing situation, the fertilizer nitrogen use. So all in all, these are the variables affecting ammonia emissions. So I mentioned the stocking rate. Grazing time is also a big factor. Generally, as we increase our grazing time, we reduce our ammonia emissions. In surplus per hectare, so that's including, that kind of is an umbrella for fertilizer, nitrogen, and the manure as well. I've already mentioned low emission slurry spreading, and uncovered systems as well. That's a huge source of emissions. So with that, to wrap up, we have a huge data set with, and we collected the data monthly over 2 years. So it's a really detailed data set as well. With a huge, and from this, we've been able to really get a great analysis for the carbon footprints, and we've shown there's a huge range with considerable potential for lowering the emissions. We did see that trend that we've seen in previous studies, where if we increase milk yield per cow, we can reduce emissions intensity. But interestingly enough, only in the house systems. However, this was we've only looked at this using a per kilo of milk functional unit. We also need to consider that area-based functional unit as well, as we need to address not only food security, but the offsetting potential from land. Land is a vital resource. We need it more and more to offset our carbon emissions, and we need it for non-renewable energy, etc. So this is a multifaceted issue, and more analysis is needed. And I guess the good thing about LCA is that we can look at other impacts, so like things like acidification and eutrophication, non-renewable energy use, global land use. We can also look at things like human edible feed conversion efficiency. So I just want to say a quick thank you as well to all the pilot farmers again. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. Thanks for all the patience over the 2 years of data collection. Thanks to all the collectors and advisors and partners as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marion. A lot to unpack in that presentation, really and truly. So if we invite the other three speakers back on to stage, please, we'll try and pick up some themes, because there seem to be a number of themes coming out in the questions. I think one is around resource efficiency, which is maybe more at the variable cost level. Then there's fixed costs, in particular questions around labour. And then the story with regard to emissions, greenhouse gases or ammonia, which of course affect policy. It affects the strategy and responsibility that the industry has to take on board, and can also impact on fixed costs. So where should we start? Well, let's pick up on the labour. Because that seems to be quite an issue in particular countries. How in your opinions, Laura and Mark, how do we balance or cater for the situation where labour is in short supply, maybe commanding greater hourly rates, the addition of a house or whatever, against tightening profitability, and whether you've seen solutions amongst the pilot farmers, thinking about robotic milking or lean management techniques, or something which can help in that direction.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that one. Yeah, I mean, labour is an issue which I think we could probably spend a whole day just talking about the issues of labour in the dairy sector. It's definitely a sort of multifaceted sort of set of issues that sort of has probably contributed to the situation we see in the dairy sector. The issue around just paying more for labour doesn't necessarily provide you with the labour. So that labour needs to be available to start with. And if the required skills and the numbers of the workers is not available, just paying higher wages isn't going to be the issue. So I think the other aspects, and I think you alluded to it, Ray, is looking at the technology side of things and look at the way that some farms operate in order to try and reduce those labour requirements. So the robotic milking is one which we've seen on farms, which can help. It also can make no difference as well. I've seen that. But it might be just simply looking at the way the whole farm is operated in terms of how the flow of the farm works. And is there some very simple, maybe even low-tech ways of changing the farm, investing in some things on the farm that allow the flow of the farm to work better, spending less time on moving cows or feeding cows or whatever it may be, or taking the cows in and back from the fields. So, there's a whole range of different things that have been done around that through better handling systems, through better equipment, etc., which can reduce that sort of labour requirement. So, yes, I think paying higher wages, it can maybe help in some areas. It will depend on the profitability of farming, whether they can afford to pay those wages. But you'd hope that if you pay higher wages, you get labour with higher skill, and you'll be able to retain that labour as well, which then helps with obviously retaining that labour and not having the cost of trying to find new labour. So that was my thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Have you got anything to add to that? I know Teagasc have been doing a bit of work in this field, I think.
So I'm with SRUC.
All right, sorry. Yeah, my
It's
God.
okay. I am Irish, so it's very
I
confusing.
know the accent threw me.
Yeah, it gets everyone. No, I
Okay.
wouldn't have too much to add. I think technology, when it's used correctly and used efficiently, can really streamline and work for the farmer. But I think a lot of it is down to training the farmers on this technology, which I think is lacking with some bits of tech that are out there. But yeah, no, I agree with Mark. If the labor is not there to begin with, there's no one to pay higher wages to. So.
And I think there's been interesting work on lean management, particularly in this area. When you really break it out, it's it's quite interesting where waste can be stripped out and value added when you get right down into the detail. So let's move on to some aspects of resource efficiency then. César, there's a question. Obviously, one of your videos was a zero grazing system.
Yes.
And then that raises the question, I think, around the trade-off between presumably increased forage utilization and the energy expended in moving the grass, harvesting it, the equipment itself, etc. Have you got any comments around particularly relative efficiency in those grazed versus zero grazed conditions?
I can tell you that this guy in the video is a very exceptional situation in terms of which is Galician dairy farming. How he's I was joking with him because he was saying that he's acting like the cow, but he's doing a perfect grazing. I mean, he's making a good use of 100% of land he's mowing every day. And well, depending on the season of the year, he's in a very particular area of Galicia in which grazing, well, he goes to grazing every 200 days of the year. So just around Christmas, and because the excess of water, he has to stop grazing. But the weather, temperature, and climate led him to go out almost every day. And depending on the season of the year, he's mowing between 7 and 4 tons of green grass every day into the shed. So in terms of which is efficiency, compared to a cow grazing, he's doing a very good job. What I didn't said was the amount of diesel, of the amount of well, he's 1 hour a day working for that, and well, I guess it's a good system, but it's not affordable for everyone. But well, he's now improving in terms of his trying to, well, he's going to set a new device in farm, which is fit to yield, well, which is an automatic feeder for cows, depending on which are the open days of these cows or which is the yield of cows. And I guess he's even going to improve which are his figures in farm.
Okay, thanks, César. This is probably another question for you. It's a nutritional question in relation to reducing the protein content in rations, particularly for higher yielding cows. And there's been some research in this area. So the question is it possible to reduce reduced nitrogen, reduced protein, going into the cow without decreasing milk yield?
I'm not sure about that, but what I'm sure is that it's very, very easy to reduce protein in very low yield cows. I mean, when we use the system of fluctuation, which is very common in very farms all around the world, well, we're feeding the same cows with, picking 60 kgs of milk with those that are close to be dry off. And I guess that's the real problem. The real problem is that, if you make a reflection, dairy is probably the only system, only cattle system, only animal system, which is not feeding the animals in depending on what their necessities. So we're still feeding cows with a fluctuation, and that is not clever, and there is a little bit nowadays out of fashion. I mean, we should be much more accurate in terms of feeding cows, and we'll get much better results in terms of carbon footprint.
Okay, there has been some research done in the UK, so maybe it's worth connecting with that through the network. At Nottingham, actually, Marion, you might have come across it actually while you were there, or while you were there. So I think we're moving on to emissions, and the relative impact of housed systems versus grazed systems on ammonia, in particular, Marion. There seems to be a bit of a trade-off there. Are there techniques, design or management interventions that can help mitigate the ammonia emissions from housed systems?
Yeah, definitely. Well, like if we I guess take aside stocking rate for a moment and just look at the house systems, it's definitely a big part of it is manure management. So I found that the uncovered systems they are on the higher end of the scale.
Okay.
If you remember that box plot I showed you, they would in the top 75%, top 50%, those farms had uncovered systems, also using low emission slurry spreading. So if you use trailing shoe compared to just your typical splash plate, you can reduce your ammonia emissions by 70%. So that's another good technique. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Marion. This probably is a good link to our next keynote speaker. It's a question around your methodology and is it factoring in carbon sequestration and the carbon that might be locked up in the soil or through another route? Does your calculation take that into account?
No, it doesn't actually, because there is there is actually quite a lot of debate whether our grassland is sequestering carbon or not. And there's, some studies do suggest that they do, maybe half a ton of carbon per hectare, but there's high uncertainties associated with that. And for that reason, that's why I haven't included it in these calculations, but it's a possibility to put that into the model.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, which I think we might take in terms of housed systems. So there's a comment here that is the higher incidence of lameness reflection of, the higher incidence of replacements, is that due to lameness in housed systems? You also mentioned, I think, Marion, the amount of time the cows spend at grass, and there is a public perception thing there as well. So in terms of the other contrasts between housed and grazed systems, what can you infer there?
I like, this is only quite a small sample in perspective. But I couldn't exactly say that it was lameness, but I guess certainly that has to play a part. But I think if we're talking in general terms, house systems, they're much larger. The mature weight is much larger than your average grazing system. A grazing system, maybe the mature weight of your dairy cow is 550 kilos compared to a house system whose mature weight of their dairy cow is 700 kilos. So they've got to achieve a higher live weight in maybe they're aiming for 24 months age of first calvings. They've got to achieve a lot higher live weight. It's I guess more intensive. They're inside for that time. I can't say if it's lameness specifically, but I think that's why there's a higher age. It's just, I guess, mainly a factor of the fact that they've got to reach a higher live weight.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're feeling refreshed after that little break. I note that there's some good knowledge exchange going on in the chat section, so please continue to contribute to that. Our next session will be delivered by Professor Jean-Baptiste Dollé from the Institut d'Élevage. We're very pleased that Jean-Baptiste has agreed to present to us today. Jean-Baptiste is head of the environmental department at Idele. He works closely with all sectors in the milk and beef sector, the research community, government bodies, etc., on the intersection of cattle production and the environment. And he's got an international reputation in that context. So for many years, has been pioneering the development of tools and methodologies to evaluate the impacts, but not only the negative impacts that we all hear about too much, but also the positive impacts on biodiversity and carbon sequestration, etc. He's also overseeing the implementation of carbon farming initiatives across many thousands of farms in France at this stage. And more recently, he's been involved in developing standardized methodology for certifying carbon reductions in agriculture, including how these can be monetized, which is a really, really interesting development. So we're very much looking forward to your presentation, Jean-Baptiste.
Thank you very much, Ray. So yes, it's a pleasure to present you the initiative we are applying in France now. I can share my screen now. No, that doesn't work. Yes, that's okay now. Do you see my screen?
Yes, I can now. That's great.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so it is a pleasure to present you the initiative done in France in order to tackle climate change. The previous presentation of the whole day well illustrate the gap we have to apply the different mitigation practices and to reduce the carbon impact of livestock production system. And so our objective is in France, following the publication, perhaps you remember of the publication of the livestock long shadow in 2006, publication of the FAO. This publication illustrates the role played by the livestock sector on climate change. And so following this publication, we began to work on methodologies and tools in order to better understand the role played by the livestock sector in climate change, and so concerning the greenhouse gas emissions, but also concerning the carbon sequestration. And it's why the last years we developed the carbon AGRI methodology and concept or scheme, which permit for us in France to boost the low carbon initiative. As a context, I just want to come back. You have this aspect in mind, but the European greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration trends. This is here all the economic sector in Europe, and you know that the agricultural sector represents 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions in green. You can see that from 1990 to now, we reduce in the agricultural sector by 11% the greenhouse gas emissions. And this reduction has been permitted by better farm efficiency, linked to the previous presentation. So we increase the milk yield per cow, for instance, we reduce the use of fertilizer, for instance. And now the objective of the European Commission first consists in reducing by 55% the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and to be carbon neutral in 2050. And so we have to play a role, a double role, in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And as we have the situation in forests, the agriculture can play a role also in sequestering more carbon in soil in order to be carbon neutral. And so if we want to achieve this global goal at European scale, it will be really important to involve farmers and to better explain them the role they can play in tackling climate change. And so the objective, we have a lot of experimentation to better understand the emission of methane, enteric methane emissions, the emissions of nitrous oxide, etc. But this is really important now to scale up the low carbon transition. First, to raise awareness among farmers, because climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, this is really complex for farmers. We have a lot of flux of greenhouse gas emissions, nitrous oxide from manure, methane from manure, enteric fermentation, etc. And so this is really important to demystify the role the agricultural sector play on this greenhouse gas emissions. It's why we developed self-assessment, simplified audit, to better understand the link between practices. And you presented any solution in the afternoon on the age at first calving, for instance, etc. The use of soya or rapeseed, etc. This is really important to highlight the link with the greenhouse gas emissions. And we developed a lot of training sessions. This is not so easy also to convince farmers to apply these mitigation practices. And so we have to convince them, to recruit them, and to advise them in applying these practices. When we want to implement some practices in farms that represent a cost for advising farmers and to follow the progress done, so with a monitoring, reporting, verification process. So who can fund this this cost? And also there was some presentation of the consumers, citizens, etc. And I think this is really important to communicate on these initiatives and also communicate on the progress done. And so the objective in France, for sure, is to involve the 500,000 farms we have in France, and at European scale, this is the 10 million farms we would like to involve also. And in order to scale up this initiative, we developed some low carbon program. So this is here 3 pilots program in dairy production, in beef production, and in sheep production. The first project concerned the dairy production system. It was a national project launched in 2012 and 2013. This project is finished now. As a beef carbon project is also finished, and so these 2 projects permitted to involve respectively 4,000 and 2,000 farms. The live beef carbon project was a European project with Ireland, Italy, and Spain and France. And we have now in progress a program for the sheep production system with 1,500 farms. And the objective of this project was to assess farms to like you did in the Dairy for Future project, to determine the gaps, the possible evolution of system in order to reduce by 15 to 20% the greenhouse gas emissions of the pilot farms involved. And so to involve a so large number of farmers, we developed in France a tool. So this is a Capture tool. So this is a whole farm assessment. So it seems really important to develop the whole farm assessment, because a farm, we have a specialized farm, but we have also in Europe farms with different production units. And so this is really, really important to develop this whole farm assessment because the farm is an equilibrium between practices, between manure management, forage production, etc. And so with this tool, we are able to assess at the same time different production system in a single farm, considering cattle production system, sheep, goat, and crops production system also. And so this is a life cycle assessment developed in this tool, considering the CO2 associated with inputs, considering also methane, nitrous oxide emissions, and considering also carbon sequestration. And so this is a mixed crop livestock production system. And so this tool first has been developed for use in France, to be used in France. And we are developing now a European version because several countries ask to use this tool, considering specific referential adapted to the national context. And the second aspect, if we want to involve a lot of farmers in this initiative, so first we need a tool to assess in the same way all farms. And secondly, we need a large partnership. And we developed this partnership in France, considering producer association. This is really important. The producer association can help in recruiting farmers. We collaborate also with the interprofessions, so the meat and dairy board in France. Public bodies like Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Agriculture are really involved also in this program, and they help us to disseminate audits in farms. And the regional council also want also to involve farmers in order to reduce the carbon footprint of the territory in the different regions. For sure, the agri-food industry asks for reducing the milk, beet, crops carbon footprint. It's why they are also involved in auditing farms using the Captura tool. And finally, the advice company and the research sector are really important also because thanks to their support, we will be able to audit farms and to implement mitigation practices in these farms. And so with the tool and with this partnership, we developed a lot of training sessions for farmers, advisors, cooperative, agri-food industry. We developed a farm assessment at national level. And so for developing this assessmented farm, we trained 1,500 French advisors for auditing farms. And so we have now 16,000 farmers involved in a low carbon action plan. And so for each one, we have all activity data, and we have also environmental burdens. And all this information is stored in a national database. And so for the meat and dairy board, that represents a large observatory of the practices applied in farms and on the evolution of the carbon footprint year after year. And thanks to this program, with the 15, 16 farmers, we wanted 3 years ago, to certify the CO2 reduction. It's why with the French Ministry of Environment, we developed a methodology, and this is a carbon AGRI methodology. And the objective of the low carbon standard in France is to quantify and to certify CO2 reductions. And so under the umbrella of this low carbon standard, we developed the carbon AGRI methodology. And so this carbon AGRI methodology is focused on mixed crop livestock system. And now we have 1,300 farmers in this certification process. You have here an overview of this, the implementation of this methodology. And so first we define the baseline. And so we do a first audit in farms to determine the carbon footprint of the different products. We advisor build with farmers a mitigation action plan. Farmers will apply this mitigation action plan during 5 years. And following these 5 years, we are doing a second audit. And the difference between the first and the second audit permit to quantify the CO2 reduction. And following this quantification, we ask for a verification. And after this verification, we are able to pay farmers for the carbon reductions on each farm. And we'll come back on the different steps. So, as I mentioned before, we use at the national scale the SCAP2R tool. We discussed this afternoon on the methodology we use. The methodology is IPCC, and to make sure the tool is sensitive to mitigation practices, we use the methodology IPCC Tier 2 and Tier 3. This is really important. Tier 1 is not sensitive to mitigation practices, but Tier 2 and Tier 3 we are able to quantify CO2 reduction in farms. And for sure, the methodology is following the methodology developed by IDF and the methodology developed by FAO in the LEAP partnership. And we, in order to make sure we have the good carbon footprint of the different products in farms, we ask for a certification by Veritas. And the certification concerns two aspects, the methodology and the quality of activity data collected in farms. And so you mentioned during the previous session the different mitigation practices. And so thanks to the survey we have in France, we identified 40 mitigation practices. The result of the Dairy for Future program highlighted some of them. We will have some mitigation practices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we work on better pasture management, if we reduce the quantity of concentrate or fertilizer, we will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Methane emission, which represent 50% of enteric methane emissions, which represent 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions, represent also a high level of reduction by improving productivity, by reducing the number of unproductive animals, by reducing the age at first calving. The consumption of energy also, we can reduce electricity and fuel consumption. We can improve feed efficiency. As it is a whole farm assessment, we consider also crops management and fertilization. And by improving the use of legumes, by reducing the fertilizer use, we will reduce the carbon footprint. And also better manure management or the implementation of biogas production will permit to reduce methane emission during storage, for instance. Concerning carbon sequestration, the development of cover crops permit to increase the carbon sequestration. Concerning the carbon sequestration, the objective is to quantify the additional carbon sequestration, but also to consider the carbon stored in soil, because we know that in livestock production system, we have a high quantity of carbon stored in the soil. And so for the additional carbon sequestration, we will be able to avoid bare soil, to develop agroforestry. Agroforestry is not really developed in France and at European scale, and hence represent an opportunity. And we can improve also temporary grassland or permanent grassland management. And thanks to the survey we have, we can say now that it is feasible to reduce by 15 to 20% the carbon footprint in our production system. And so this is not sufficient because we have to reduce more the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and by 2050. But this is for us the first step in relation with farm efficiency. And we know that we will have another practices we will be able to apply in future. For instance, with feed additive to reduce methane emissions. So free NOP, for instance, algae, citrus, etc. And we will work also on genetics improvement in order to reduce methane emissions or improving feed efficiency. And so on medium farm in France, the reduction is in a range from 300 to 400 tons of CO2 on a 5-year period. So climate change is an important issue, but we absolutely want to make sure that we consider also the other environmental burdens and the social aspect. It's why in the Capture tool, we monitor also the contribution of agriculture and our livestock production system to biodiversity, considering, for instance, the linear meter of hedges, the area of grassland. Soil fertility in relation with carbon sequestration is really important also, and in relation with food performance. It's why this is also really important to follow these indicators. And we also have another indicators in relation with ammonia emissions. So this is air quality, water quality in relation with nitrates leaching. We want to reduce deforestation, so the use of soya, and the production of renewable energy. And so all indicators are following when we build the mitigation action plan with each farmers. And so when we apply these mitigation practices in farms, when we assess these farms, we are able, with the carbon AGRI methodology certified by the ministry, to quantify the CO2 reduction. And so we compare the baseline scenario to the project scenario. And on the 5 years, so this is the crediting period, we quantify the CO2 reduction. We ask for an external auditor to verify the CO2 avoided. And following this verification, the French Ministry of Environment is certifying the CO2 reduction. And following this verification and this certification, we are able to proceed to the result-based payment. And so we reward farmers for the CO2 reductions associated to the mitigation practices applied in their farms. So if we want to involve first farmers to do the audit, to support farmers in applying these mitigation practices, to verify the CO2 emission, to ask for the certification for the Ministry of Environment. This is really complex for a farmer. And so it's why we developed, the Producer Association developed France Carbon AGRI Association. So this is an association who is doing the link between farmers, advice company, the French ministry, and carbon buyers. And so the objective is to facilitate the carbon rewarding mechanism to make sure farmers will be paid by reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And so we have at French level different collective projects. And so the France Carbon AGRI Associations launched 2 calls in order to select farmers and project developers. And France Carbon AGRI Association is doing the link with carbon buyers. And so carbon buyers, we have different carbon buyers now from public entities, private entities, bank, regional council, etc. This is here an example of a low carbon action plan applied in a dairy farm. So you well know the mitigation practices we suggested to these farmers. So we reduce the quantity, we optimize the quantity of concentrate. We use lipids to reduce methane emissions. We reduce the edge at first calving. We implement leguminous in order to reduce the quantity of fertilizer, and we plant ages. And so on these farms, the reduction is 14%. And so on the 5-year project, that represents between 300 and 400 tons. And when we sell this carbon on the voluntary carbon market, so that represents financial support from 9,000 to 12,000 or more euro per farm. And so the amount will depend on the number of mitigation practices applied, and will depend also on the farm size. So this is not an important financial support for farmers, but when we say that it is linked also with farm efficiency, so the first gain represents the better efficiency at farm level, and the second gain is represented by the carbon offset and the carbon rewarding. And so on this map, you have the farmers involved in the two projects developed by France Carbon Agri Association. So with the 1,300 farmers, and all these farmers will reduce by 700 and 1,000 tons of CO2 during the 5 years. And so we are selling now this CO2 avoided in order to reward farmers for their reduction. And so this is the mechanism in progress in France. And you know that the European Commission is building now the carbon farming initiative. And so there is a lot of discussion around the carbon farming initiative. And so it's why we developed several projects in order to feed the farm carbon initiative. The first project in progress now, this is a live carbon farming project. We have the project Clean Farms for climate neutral farms. And a third project, this is a climate farm demo project. And so the objective of this three project in progress now, the first objective is to develop harmonized tool and standards at European scale. So this is really important that we determine the CO2 avoided, and so we have the same accountability, carbon accountability at European scale concerning greenhouse gas emissions, but also carbon removal. This is important also for facilitating the involvement of farmers to demonstrate that it is feasible to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions now. This is important also to help farmers in applying the mitigation practices, and so to upscale the carbon rewarding mechanism. And thanks to this project, we will be able to feed the European carbon farming strategy. And so you have an overview of the countries involved in this free project. The Climate Farm Demo project is a more ambitious project because all European countries are involved in this project, plus UK and Switzerland. And so we have in this project 80 partners and 1,500 farms involved as a pilot farm in order to demonstrating applying mitigation practices. So according to us, Carbon Agri scheme is an innovative mechanism. For sure, that's permitted recently to involve more and more farmers because they ask to be certified for that reduction. And so this mechanism permits to quantify and certify the CO2 reduction. So we need a robust monitoring, reporting, verification process in each country and at European scale. That permits also to develop transparency accounting because the methodology is certified by the ministry. Perhaps in future we will have a methodology certified or concept or framework certified by the European Commission. That's permit to remove barriers in applying mitigation practices and so to support farmers in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And also that permits to mobilize innovative funds for local climate actions. And so with different entities interested by offsetting their greenhouse gas emissions at a local scale. So this is not, we won't be net zero carbon after this first step, but this is the first step, we think, to move to carbon neutrality. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. That very interesting presentation. Please keep questions coming in the chat. It's good to see agriculture being recognized as part of the solution and not just always part of the problem. So I think we'll begin with some questions around the methodology, Jean-Baptiste. There's one here about methane and how it is factored into greenhouse gas accounting. I think it relates to the life cycle of methane. There's clearly a growing chorus that our targets should be separated from methane vis-a-vis other greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in those countries that have got a disproportionate amount of emissions coming from agriculture. So, Harpal, if you could pull up that question on methane, but I think that's where it's coming from, Jean-Baptiste. Can you comment on how methane is handled within your methodology and maybe where it might be going in the future?
So methane emissions, enteric methane emissions. So this is a tier 3 approach. These enteric emissions are determined considering digestibility of feed, quantity of feed, and quantity of feed consumed per animal, considering the productivity of each one at herd scale. And so we consider also if we use some lipids, for instance, we can reuse these methane emissions. And so we use the global warming potential of IPCC, which is 28 kilo of CO2 per kilo of methane. Perhaps the question is in relation with the WP star, yes. But we do not consider for the moment this aspect because we absolutely want to follow for now the IPCC methodology and the IPCC recommendation for sure. But we have some studies on this aspect and to measure the effect of this new methodology. And perhaps in future we will be able to use this one. But for the moment, this is really important to follow the IPCC recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Another related question: the carbon farming tool model. Is it envisaged that this would be the same for all countries? The broad applicability, or
no? I think we can have different tools in different countries. But I think really important to define a common standard and common standard at European scale. And this standard will establish the methodology we have to follow, for instance, for methane emissions or for carbon sequestration. And each tool will have to make sure they are following this methodology. And so we can have one tool for maybe several countries if it is necessary, for sure. But this is not an obligation. If each tool is verifying that is following this methodology, and we can ask for an external auditor for doing this assessment and to make sure that the tool is following the methodology. And for sure, we will be able to calculate with different tools in the same way the carbon footprint of products at European scale.
There's a comment around the footprint for soybean, which suggests that the metrics ought to be different. The metrics ought to be different depending on the origin and the land use change.
And so we use referential, international referential concerning the soybean and the carbon footprint of the soybean. Consider carbon carbon release associated to deforestation. And so this referential is free to use for each LCA assessment. And so we can share this aspect if you want any information of the carbon footprint of soybean we use. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now there's a question here which is a sort of word of warning for the dairy industry, or maybe flagging up some risk. Perhaps if you can pull it up, Harpal. But I think it's suggesting that if we got into the situation of carbon credit quotas, for example, and analogies with milk quotas in the past, that there could be penalties. So it's as much a question around whether there are potential risks and downsides from farmers engaging in this initiative or development.
Yes.
At farm level or at farm level or industry level.
Yes, this is a risk. For instance, in New Zealand, they are pricing methane emissions, And so farmers, so this is in discussion now in New Zealand, farmers will have to audit their farms and they will be priced on this methane and nitrous oxide emissions. For the moment, in Europe, at French level, this is not the case. The objective is to reward farmers for efforts done in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. But we don't know what will be the future. The objective is to, because, for instance, regarding the nitrates directive, for the nitrates directive, we didn't develop any programs in order to reduce nitrate leaching, etc. And we wait for the publication of the nitrates directive. The objective here is to anticipate a future rule or future regulation, and so thanks to these voluntary projects, and we hope that this voluntary project will avoid any penalties or any regulation on the CO2 emissions. We hope so. But this is a risk, yes. But it's difficult to say this is a risk, and so we have to wait, because we are able to reduce now. The livestock sector is concerned by greenhouse gas emissions, and as we are able to reduce our carbon impact, I think this is important to put into practice now what we can do in farms. So.
Okay, thanks. There's a question here relating to why the focus on hedges, farm hedges, rather than the creation of forestry, and the subsidiary question for me around how one can, as efficiently as possible, collect this data, and whether there's technology being deployed which reduces the costs and maybe increases the granularity proportionately relative to what you're trying to measure.
First, we are not focused on ages. It was an example, but for instance, if we increase the area of grassland, temporary or permanent grassland, this is also a good opportunity for sequester more carbon. Forest, this is also possible. Agroforestry, this is also possible. So we have different solutions for increasing carbon sequestration. First, we have to maintain also the carbon stored in soil. So this is really important. And after, we can also discuss on the granulometry of activity data we need to do this assessment. And we have to find the best compromise between collecting a lot of activity data, because we know that if we want to build a mitigation action plan in France, for instance, we need approximately 200 activity data. So that means that an advisor will spend half a day with a farmer to collect this activity data and to build the mitigation action plan. So if we want to reduce this time, we have to develop interoperability with the different database we can have in different countries to reduce the time in collecting activity data. Because we need, if we want to build an individual action plan, we need a sufficient granulometry on activity data also. Because we also developed, the capture tool is developed in 2 levels. The first level, this is functioning with 30 activity data, so this is a simplified analysis, but this is not sufficient for building a mitigation action plan with farmers. It's why we need a more complete analysis. But we have to find the best compromise, and in the monitoring and reporting and verification process also, because if we have a monitoring and reporting process which represent a high cost, we will consume all the funds we would be able to reward to farmers. So.
Okay, thank you. One final question, more of a political question than anything, I guess. How does this system help to reach zero emissions globally if the carbon saved by farmers is emitted by other sectors and I guess elsewhere in the world?
Yes. Yes, but if this mechanism permits to reduce the greenhouse gas emission of the agricultural sector, I think this is positive. So there is uncompressive emissions in some sector, in any sector. for instance, associated to electricity consumption. And so these emissions are incompressible. So this is important to compensate the emissions. And some entities, the last years compensate or offset their emissions in all around the world. We think that it is positive if these entities are able to contribute at local scale in each country or at European scale for compensating their emissions.
Thank you very much, Professor Dollé, and thank you, audience, for your questions. That was a really interesting session. Thank you again. We're now going to take our lives in our courage in our hands, maybe our lives in our hands. Again, we're going into our second and final breakout session. So hopefully you and we are a bit more familiar with the pattern, so you can join your chosen group again. Click on the session button on the left hand side, and then you identify the flag, the breakout session that you want to join. I think we're going to adapt the approach for this one and maybe reduce the risk a little. I think our chairs and rapporteurs have been asked to summarize on the chat what the key points from the discussions were, and then we can bring them up on screen when you come back to report. If you happen to have several themes and you're not able to put it on one comment, then please bundle them under a number of comments. And also my colleague Harpel will help people navigate their way back to the main session, because that seemed to be the problem last time, and also shutting down the link from the breakout session, which was interfering with our main session. So I hope to see you back here at 4:15. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all now back in the room. We are on the last lap after the final breakout session. So hopefully we can bring you some feedback from each of those in a moment. I've also been sent the results of the polls that have been conducted within those sessions. There's actually quite a lot in there, which I think we will have to subsume into the material coming from this symposium, rather than try and cover all of it now. So Harpel, are we ready to bring some of the rapporteurs back on? I don't see any real summation as yet in the chat.
Okay. So I will be short. So there was not a lot of farmers with us. So we consider the different practices to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions and also ammonia emissions. And the main practices were related to the management of the feeds, mainly by reducing the use of concentrates and valorize the maximum of forage produced on the farms and or the territory where is the farms. At least we have in the west of France around 90 and 95% of forage produced on the farm. So large part of the dairy farms are autonomous on this forage aspect, and they try to reduce the use of concentrates, and mainly to reduce or to increase the protein autonomy. So one thing on the diets of the dairy herds, but also concerning the reduction of the replacement rate, and also, but it was not described or proposed in the poll, but the age at first calving, because we saw that it was also a possibility to with this practice to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions, but always related to the situation of the farms, and if the objective is to reduce the age at first calving, it has to be also related to the use of the area, and if a lot of or if the heifers use permanent grasslands, for example, if you reduce the age at first calving and you broke your grasslands to produce crops, that maybe a benefit for the whole farm. So it was also questions about that. And the last things concerns mainly the management of manure, like the like to cover the pit, the slurry pit, or to reduce the use of mineral fertilizer. So what we discuss about also about what can be done to block the bias, to continue the analysis of or to continue to work on this aspect with farmers, and what it can be done to continue the low carbon aspect on dairy farms. So we think that to work on improve the efficiency of dairy farms is a good way, and yes, to discuss about how to improve the efficiency of dairy farms is a good way to reduce greenhouse gases emissions, and to reduce all the other environmental impacts. So using this kind of tool like Capture in France is a good way to discuss with farmers about this aspect of efficiency that can lead also to economic performances. Because if you are more efficient, you are on the technical aspect, you are also efficient on economical and on economy aspect, and also on environmental aspect. And we conclude also that it's very important and related to the carbon credit and what it was done and what it is done on the dairy farms is mainly due to the producers and farmers have to manage all this aspect, and mainly this carbon credit, for example, and just to be sure that it's not only the processors or the dairy industries keep the main results of this kind of strategy. Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvain. Win-win is
Yes.
the approach, if you can, and a whole chain approach. That's what I'm taking from your key points. Thank you very much. Harpal, we have the next rapporteur, please.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to bring Jamie from the UK session onto stage now.
Hello. Interestingly, I think much of our conversation mirrored the one that it seemed that we've just had feedback on. In my notes, I have literally written, look for the win-wins, because we talked about farmers perhaps being more motivated by profitability than they perhaps are currently by carbon footprint. So the result to our poll was focusing, people wanted to reduce concentrate use, reduce their fertilizer use, and potentially so legumes. They were the top 3 scoring answers in our poll around how people wanted to mitigate or the preferred way to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And there's been some work done in Ireland focusing on using legumes, so white clover in grazing systems, and I think predominantly red clover in silage systems. So we discussed that. But I suppose the farmers in general are probably looking to reduce their input costs, and the wider benefit is that will also have an impact on their carbon footprinting. We talked about whole farm feed efficiency, and how focusing on one area in isolation can perhaps cause blinkers. And we also talked about the positioning of grant aid, or that reward and penalty, to incentivize people to actually make changes on farm. Certainly lots of grant aid at the moment is focusing, in Britain anyway, around protecting water quality, and so things like covered slurry stores are sort of becoming increasingly either popular, or maybe farmers are feeling pressurized into taking those options. But it's interesting that didn't score at all as a preferred option in our poll, because it was one of the possible answers. We also talked a little bit about, in the UK, there being such a big number of carbon footprinting tools available, and that being a barrier to people even trying to do their own carbon footprint, and the benefit of having one tool that was sort of universally recognized could be an advantage. But the other areas that we talked about were who owns that data, and the concerns around whether that data would be used as a reward or a penalty, whether it's a tool to increase transparency to the consumer, or whether it's something that becomes regulatory. Yeah, so really, all in all, we were talking about looking for the win-wins, and age at first calving was one that came out as a priority. So I think my feedback mirrors what we've already had. Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. A nice mixture of sort of management approaches, but also the perception around data and how data are used, etc. We shouldn't ever lose sight of that. Okay, Harpal, we've got Pilar next, is it?
Okay. Yes. Well, from our team, from the group of Spain, the results of the poll have been the following. Then, for the first option has been to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce the stocking rate, followed by the reduction in the use of fertilizers, and the third option has resulted in the increase of legumes and reduction of concentrates. These are the results of the poll. Then we have been commenting about the motivation to the farmer to calculate the carbon footprint, and what are the inconveniences or advantages. Then we have concluded that the motivations are either the industry or the consumers' request to calculate the carbon footprint. Also, we have commented that it is important to have the support of the government and the technical assessment to carry out divulgation and transfer and divulgation of information about this tool, the advantages of this carbon tool to improve efficiency of economy. In relation to what the dairy sector can do to improve the carbon, the image, Well, we have come to the conclusion that again that it's necessary to join to the sector and in order to improve communication and education in schools, universities, to transfer to the society which are the advantages and the services that the sector can provide to the society. That there is that lack of knowledge in the society, and that somehow we need to join to vehiculate that information. And that's all from our group.
Thank you, Pilar, and an integrated approach which links to the consumer and also identifies a role for government to play. Thank you for that. Who's next, Harpal?
Hi, Ray. So up next, I'm going to bring Henrique from the Portugal group up onto stage.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So the discussion was very shy in the beginning and finished very animated, but we didn't add any participant. I suppose I didn't see any participant from Azores. Maybe they are still having lunch. I don't know. And what we discussed was also as Sylvain, I heard Sylvain saying that we need an integrated approach to at the farm to connect all these aspects like concentrate reduction, substitution rate of the replacement rate for the cows, the use of local feeds produced at the farm, like lucerne or alfalfa, to substitute the soybean, because if we keep in mind the emissions and the origin of the emissions for North Portugal, and we saw that the concentrates are very important, especially due to the soybean import, and also to cover the slurry tanks, because this was the main emissions that could be controlled or more easily controlled for the North Portugal. So we missed some discussion about the Azores Islands, but this is mainly the results or the discussion we did. So it's necessary to integrate all these aspects, including the feeding, the efficiency of the diets, the age at first calving, and all these other aspects related. So, but it's not to see each one of these aspects separated, but it's necessary to combine all them at the same time and look to the costs that we have to produce 1 kilogram of milk or 1 liter of milk, because it's something that it's not taken into account in many of the Portuguese farms. Thank you, Ray. I suppose so, a little bit confusing, but it was the main ideas.
Okay, thank you, Enrique. There was a lot in there, and it just was reminiscent a little bit of when you speak about economics and return on investment, I guess, a marginal abatement, curves which might have practical application, what you're getting for your book, so to speak. So we've had a message from David in the Azores. I don't think he's got much more to contribute than has already been heard at this particular stage. So I think we've come to the end of our symposium. We've had some really wide-ranging and stimulating range of papers and interactions, and I expect we'll be able to harvest what we've heard today and take into take into our reporting. We've also had 2 stimulating presentations from our keynote speakers, giving us some in-depth insight and also challenges. So I'm sure that the project team will be working hard over the summer to continue their analysis and interpretation of the data that's been collected, and to package it up in a way that can be applied around the most impactful innovations and strategies that have been identified. I think all the time being aware that it's two-way traffic with the person who's on the ground, knows their system, and is charged with implementing management and husbandry, rather than solely top down, going back to the ACIS presentation that Liz King made earlier. So I'd just like to thank all who have contributed today, the speakers, the translators, who do a fantastic job. I don't know how they achieve what they do. The pilot farmers in particular, project partners and associated project partners, and last but by no means least, and very importantly, to acknowledge the funding provided by the EU Interreg Atlantic Area Programme. So just one request from us: if you could please complete the feedback form, which is pinned to the top of the chat on the right hand side, I believe, and return that to the virtual registration desk. It'll help us refine our approach to how we run these events, so that participants can derive as much value as possible. You've all given up your time to attend, so I think it's important that we receive your feedback and act on it. And finally, can I remind you and invite you to the final Dairy for Future conference, which is a face-to-face event, which will take place in Saint-Malo in Brittany on the 27th and 28th of September. So we would hope to see many of you there in person. So thank you for joining. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your evening.